Good morning, everyone. Welcome to UUCC, the UU Church of Canandaigua. I'm Eileen, I'm your minister. I'm so glad to be with you this morning. I'm excited to welcome you to our service this morning. And before we begin, I have just one quick announcement to share with you. No slides or anything. It is just a reminder that next week for worship, we join First Unitarian Church in Rochester. Next week for worship, we join First Unitarian Church in Rochester. It is the same time, 10 a.m. as our service, but a different link. So you can find that Zoom link either on First Unitarian's website or in your newsletter, which you've probably already received from us, your monthly newsletter or your This Week newsletter, which you'll receive in the upcoming week. If you're not getting a newsletter from us and you'd like to, there's a link to a visitor guest book in the chat, and you can fill that out there, leave us your email address, and we'll make sure you get on the newsletter list. And with that, let us take a deep breath in, and let's enter a space of worship. Light our chalices together. If you have a chalice or any old candle, I invite you to grab it now and let's light them as we say our chalice lighting words. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. This morning, I want to introduce you to a special guest. This is Frank the Dinosaur. Now, I brought Frank the Dinosaur along to worship this morning because I want to tell you, last summer, Frank the Dinosaur broke the screen on my living room window. Now, he won't admit to it, but the screen is broken, and Frank's 4-year-old caretaker, well, he told me it was Frank who did it. I have no choice to believe him since Frank has said nothing on the topic so far. All I know is that window screen is broken and Frank's been blamed. And I think that's part of why we come to church, because it's hard to admit when we messed up, isn't it? Sometimes it's easier to pretend that nothing ever happened. Sometimes it's easier to pretend it's the other person's fault. Sometimes it's easier to pretend Frank did it. But here in this community, we create a space, or we try to, we do our best to create a space where we can be lovingly accountable to and for one another, where we can call each other in when we make mistakes, back into right relationship with one another, where we are safe to say, I messed up, I was wrong, I admit it, and I'm sorry. Let us be that space. Let us make that space for one another this morning and all mornings. And together, let's sing our opening hymn, Once to Every Soul and Nation.
once to every soul and nation comes the moment to decide. In the strife of truth with falsehood, for the good or evil side, then to stand with truth is noble when we share its granted trust. Ere that cause bring fame and profit, and 'tis prosperous to be just. Though the cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong. Though its portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong, then it is the brave one chooses, while the coward stands aside, till the multitude make virtue of the faith they have denied.
Now it's time for a story. This morning's story is by Gail Forsyth Vale, who worked with some other religious educators to write it. And as many of you probably know, because you have a calendar or you talked about it in school, this week was Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And the story starts like this. There was a man named Rip Van Winkle who liked to share stories and was kind to children, but he avoided hard work or anything he thought was unpleasant. One day, as the story goes, he found a nice grassy place on a mountain, and he fell fast asleep there under a comfy old tree. But this was no ordinary nap. Rip Van Winkle slept for over 20 years. 20 years. What do you suppose he missed? Imagine what we might have missed if we'd been asleep for these last 20 years. As a matter of fact, one of the most important things that Rip Van Winkle missed in this story was the American Revolution. When he went up the mountain, he lived in a British colony. When he came down 20 years later, he lived in a new place called the United States. This is an old and famous story, but you might be surprised to know it was a favorite of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He told this one a lot. As a matter of fact, he told it to a huge crowd of Unitarian Universalists in 1966, a little over 50 years ago. He talked about the civil rights movement and urged all those who heard him that day to wake up, to not sleep through the big changes that were happening all around as Black people and their supporters worked to gain equal rights. He asked the white people in Unitarian Universalist congregations in particular to not be asleep and ignore injustice. He urged people to wake up. Well, in the last few years, a new set of leaders from the people of color community are sending the same message that Dr. King sent over 50 years ago. Wake up. Many of the injustices, much of the unfairness is still here. And there are new injustices. Wake up. So today we're asking you to help deliver this message to Unitarian Universalists who are sitting here with us this morning, who are in our families, to people beyond our families in our communities. Can you help me wake everyone up? Let's practice saying in our own homes, wake up to injustice. You try it. Wake up to injustice. And many people who've not been paying attention, who have been comfortably asleep are now waking up to injustice thanks to new young leaders. And we'll talk more about waking up later on today. Thank you for listening. This is the end of our story. Now is the time in our service when we share the deepest feelings of our hearts with one another. We are a community that holds one another in our joys and in our sorrows, in our celebrations and in our pain. And whatever it is that lies on your heart this morning, know that we are with you. I invite you to use the chat feature on Zoom to share with us what it is, what are the deepest feelings of your heart today, what it is that's on your heart. Are there joys or sorrows to lift up this morning? I invite you to share them now. There's a lot we are holding today. Fun church activities together and Carrie's hard work hosting. The end of Laura's exam paper, worry about violence the next week, about dogs in the White House so soon. Healing thoughts for Bill and Pat's exchange student, Aurora's new job, Joan's appointment for a vaccination, and soon, hopefully, all of ours. Loving memories of a lost friend. Thoughts and care for sick patients with COVID, for sick people everywhere, for college students returning to school with so much uncertainty, especially for Eli. For these and all the thoughts and feelings that remain in the silence of our hearts, know that we are with you. And friends, I invite you now into the spiritual practice of generosity. Ours is a church that is funded by its members. The good work of this community is done because of the good and generous donations of all of you. You make that possible. So we ask if you'll give generously to this morning's offering. Each month we share a quarter of our offering from our services with a monthly service partner. And this month's service partner is the Worker Justice Center of New York. There are a couple of ways that you can give this morning. You could visit our website at canandaiguauu.org/connection/donate and give there. Or you could mail a check to UUCC at 3024 Cooley Road in Canandaigua. Or you could set up an automatic Sunday giving with your bank or monthly giving with your bank if that's the easiest way for you. However you give, if you make a note that it's intended for our Sunday worship offering, then we will be sure to share a quarter of that with our service partner. And we thank you for giving generously today. I invite you now to prepare ourselves for a time of centering and meditation, followed by shared silence. Get comfortable in your seat. Maybe let your feet find the ground or some part of you feel well supported and connected to the earth. Take a deep breath in. Let your shoulders relax. Perhaps close your eyes. This morning's meditation words are called What is Unveiled? The Founding Wound by Adrienne Marie Brown. They were written last Wednesday. A body is always a body, individual or collective, whole or in many pieces, alive or later dead. A body is always vulnerable. A wound is always a wound, singular and deep or many cuts, slowly, left untreated, unstaunched, denied. A wound will always fester. The first wound happens within the violence of birth, the expulsion from the illusion of safety, from the idea that someone else will do all the labor. And some of us keep looking everywhere for placenta, for mothering, for acceptance of our worst choices, to be told we are so special, to be named a favorite child. Some of us learn to work. We are given tools, lectures, practices. We are given the blessing of knowing that work to nourish the collective is a sacred path for our lives. Some are only taught to eat, given the title to land that isn't ours, judged for the speck of dirt under our nails, set to race against even our own kin, for the never-ending victory of more. Some of us are Black, still nauseous from the boat's hold, still catching our breath from snapped ropes, still oiling our calloused field hands, and still wounded. Some of us are white, still synonymous with impossible purity, still given no songs from the earth, still taught to master nothing but superiority, and still wounded. Some of us are red, yellow, brown, still made to feel tertiary to the plot, still dismissed for all we remember, still claiming we are human, not terrorist, and still wounded. Some of us are never surprised, never apoplectic when the stench hits us. What rots at the core is known, documented, is tangible, moral, American, spiritual. It is the founding wound, gray only at the surface, brittle black where the injury began, a rainbow of bruising everywhere. Green mold making life in dying flesh. We are well past the age of turning inwards, of seeing the open wounds on our souls, of stepping into our shadows with truth light, of seeing we were shaped and can change, of believing the wound is who we are. We know the smell of decay. We see the swollen flesh of infection. It is not rude to acknowledge the stink, to wonder if it is viral, venom, survivable, to look for the lacerations. Things are not getting worse, they are getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight and continue to pull back the veil. See, we, the body, we are the wounded place. We live on a resilient earth where change is the only constant, in bodies whose only true whiteness is the blood cell that fights infection and the bone marrow that holds. Remove the shrapnel, clean the wound, relinquish inflammation, let the chaos calm. The body knows how to scab like lava stone, leaving the smooth marring scars of lessons learned. Denial will not disappear a wound. The wound is not the body. A body cannot be divided. The founder's wound is the myth of supremacy. This is not the first wound or the last. We are a species before we are a nation, and after. Warriors, organizers, storytellers, dreamers, all of us are healers. The healing path is humility, laughter, awareness, truth, and choice. A scab is a boundary on territory between what is within and what is without when the line has been breached. Stop picking it, it slows the healing. We are our only relevant hope. We are our only possible medicine. A body is always a body, wounded, festering, healing, healed. We choose each day what body we will shape with the miraculous material we are gifted. Let us finally attend to the wound. Let us finally name the violence. Let us finally break the cycle of supremacy. Let us finally choose ourselves whole. Let us finally love ourselves whole. Amen.
of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Well, I had planned to preach today on how to make a good apology, because making amends for our own wrongdoing is part of being in relationship, part of being in a community, part of being in a society. But, well, it's been a hell of a year so far, hasn't it? It's only January 17th, y'all. And it turns out we have a whole lot to discuss about how a bad apology looks before we can really get a handle on a good apology. So this one sermon will have to be a two-part series where forgiveness comes next month. All we can possibly cover right now is the first and foremost, most important step of reconciliation that's needed before a good apology can even begin. Before we take a single step toward healing a harm, repairing a relationship, reconciliation of conflict, the so-called unity that many have called for in the aftermath of last week's insurrection at our Capitol, we first have to acknowledge accountability. Before beginning an apology, perpetrators of harm need to embrace their own responsibility for what went wrong. Who actually broke the window screen? Without real accountability, there can be no real or good apology. There can be no reconciliation. And those of us who've had to apologize in our lives for misdeeds less dire than right-wing terrorism, which is to say, hopefully all of us, know intimately that embracing accountability is one of the hardest parts of an apology. Saying to ourselves and to others, I messed up, I was wrong. All of us have a tricky tendency to avoid that. We avoid accountability when we focus on our own feelings or motives and not our actions. We avoid it by saying things like, I feel such a way about this, as yet unaccounted for event. Instead of naming our wrong behavior, we make the apology about us and our feelings. We say things like, I feel so many feelings about this event. Sometimes we go on for pages and pages about all the things we feel and never once actually say we did something wrong. We avoid accountability when we say things that deflect accountability to others. The classic if-pology. If I offended anyone, I am sorry. If I did harm, I am sorry. If my words were construed in such a way, I am sorry. If, it seems too simple to say, though we make this mistake all the time, but it is actually incumbent on us as apologizers to discern within ourselves before beginning an apology whether we did something wrong. There should be no if in an apology. Then there's also deflection, the what about apology. I've made mistakes, but everyone else has too. Worse than me, maybe. What about them? The what about apology is a classic. If there's anyone out there that has never said anything they wish they could take back. Then there's the ever popular, ever political mistakes were made. It's very popular. This avoidance technique just makes accountability so diffuse that really no one is to blame. It's just as if mistakes happened all on their own. We avoid accountability when we gaslight, when we pretend that no harm was done, no wrong committed, when we try to convince those harmed that their hurt was imagined, when we say things like, the media has taken to sounding the alarm bells over a second wave of coronavirus infections. Such a panic is overblown. We pretend the harm doesn't exist at all when we gaslight. And we also avoid accountability when we project our wrongdoing back on the victim. It flips the roles of harmed and harmers. This is what gaslighting does. It's an attempt to make victims feel like they deserve their suffering, to feel that they themselves are accountable for it. It sounds like I had to be cruel, violent, unkind, etc., because you did what you did. It sounds like these are the things that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away. These are just the things that happen. And we need to talk about this step, the step of accountability in the reconciliation process today, because we just witnessed an attempt at a fascist coup on our government last week, just lived through a 4-year regime of an authoritarian leader who made an unholy alliance with fascism. We have watched the growth of a radical right-wing fascist movement from the dark corners of the internet to the streets of Washington, D.C. And we do need healing. We do need unity. But before that, we need accountability. I want to be clear for a moment that I use the word fascist with purpose and not as a hyperbole. If the actual Nazi flags at the Capitol, the t-shirts with slogans like Camp Auschwitz weren't enough, this is a movement with telltale characteristics of white identity wrapped in the idea of a nation that excludes outsiders on the basis of race or impurity, centralized around a charismatic authoritarian figure. Classic fascism. This is an extension, a natural outgrowth of the culture of white supremacy that Dr. King spent his life working to defeat. And the language here matters because white supremacy and fascism have a real problem with accountability. It is like classic domestic violence on a national scale. And harm doing is so normalized that demanding accountability starts to feel like the real harm. Deflection, avoidance, defensiveness, gaslighting, these cause an added layer of trauma to those who are harmed. They serve to disperse blame like scattershot so that it appears that everyone shares it equally and no one holds its true heft. And when we lose the means to hold one another accountable, we lose relationship. We lose our humanity. But we are not powerless here. That is not what I came to preach this morning. We can demand accountability and accept no apologies without it. And that does not have to look like turning from justice and peace toward the tempting idols of law and order. Resisting authoritarian power does not mean seizing authoritarian power on our own terms. It means waking up to practice a radically different kind of power, not a power of domination, but a power of justice, collective community power. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s goal was not to see Bull Connor languish in a jail cell as he had done, but to see his heart redeemed by love, his type of power overtaken by power of a radically different kind. And here, I'm going to get a little ministerial, if you'll allow it. Accountability as at the core of our universalism. It is one of the more uncomfortable aspects of our faith for me this week, to have to believe that Donald Trump has inherent worth and dignity, to imagine the Proud Boys are redeemable, that my healing and wholeness is tied up with the guy who's waving a flag with an actual swastika on it. I would like to tell them all to go to hell. But our faith doesn't allow for that. I am in the wrong church for that desire to be fulfilled. As Unitarian Universalists, we can believe all kinds of things about what redemption looks like, about what healing and wholeness and salvation look like. But we cannot believe there is redemption for some and not for all. Wherever we are going, we're going together. We can look around this world and believe this is glorious or believe this is a mess, but we cannot, as Unitarian Universalists, believe that any brokenness in the universe is irredeemable. We cannot damn one bit of this world to hell. Ours is a faith that demands accountability and demands we demand it of one another, because for us, there is no alternative. No one, we believe, no part of creation is irredeemably broken, so we cannot write them off. And no one is healed or made whole without accountability, without right relationship. So we are tied to one another irrevocably. And here is our joy and our hope and our hard work. Here is where we can practice accountability ourselves. We can resist by being accountable to and for one another. We can resist authoritarian power by being accountable for dismantling the scaffolding of white supremacy it has built inside of us and our communities. We can resist it by being accountable for the safety of our neighbors, putting our bodies on the line of harm to protect them. We can resist it by living out our accountability to one another in the form of mutual aid for our communities. We can resist it with a good apology by simply being able to say, I have done wrong, I have been complicit, I have enacted harm, it matters to me that I hurt you, and accepting nothing less in the path of healing. This is the kind of accountability that must win, that makes fascism bound to lose. And that is happening. The needle is moving. The fascists are losing. And so long as we don't fall prey to the avoidance traps, it will continue to move. So long as we don't concede to some imaginary center between fascist and not fascist, it will continue to move. Healing is possible. Redemption is possible. Unity is possible, not in the center ground between here and evil, but within the circle of restoring love. Because only love, the love that leaves no one out, can win. May it be so.
Well, I'm gonna tell you fascists, you may be surprised. People in this world are getting organized. You're bound to lose, you fascists bound to lose. All of you fascists bound to lose. All of you fascists bound to lose. All of you fascists bound to lose. You're bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose. There's people of every nation marching side by side, marching across the fields where a million fascists died. You're bound to lose, you fascists bound to lose. All of you fascists bound to lose. All of you fascists bound to lose. All of you fascists bound to lose. You're bound to lose, you fascists bound to lose.
I want to offer as a benediction and a charge these words from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If peace means being complacently adjusted to a deadening status quo, I don't want peace. If peace means keeping my mouth shut in the midst of injustice and evil, I don't want it. Peace is not simply the absence of conflict, but the existence of justice for all people. Amen. Will you join together in singing our closing hymn, Lift Every Voice and Sing?
You can go right to the first words. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, praising the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Slowly the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when no unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat and at our weary feet, come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the one gleam of a bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou hast brought us on the way. Thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
That hymn makes me tear up a little bit. Let's extinguish our chalices together, friends. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth. the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.